An arrogant millionaire makes a cruel bet to marry a beggar out of pure whim. But what starts as a selfish game takes an unexpected turn when he discovers that she has a past that connects their lives in unimaginable ways. This revelation changes everything, leading him to question who he really is and to fall in love with the last person he expected. Logan Harrison was the kind of man who seemed to live as if the world were merely a board for his games of power and vanity. At just over 30, he was known in New York not only for his impressive fortune, inherited and multiplied through risky investments, but also for his extravagant lifestyle. His parties, held in the luxurious penthouse of one of the tallest buildings in Manhattan, were legendary. People fought for invitations, and the venue, with its glass walls offering a stunning view of the city skyline, was the stage for frivolous conversations and exaggerated laughter. That night, the party felt like any other. Electronic music pulsed, champagne glasses were constantly refilled, and the guests, dressed in expensive attire, formed small groups, laughing and chatting. Logan was at the center of it all, as always. He was the charismatic host, moving back and forth, his magnetic presence drawing admiring and envious glances. "So Logan," began Ethan, one of his closest friends, or at least someone who liked to think of himself that way. Ethan was a renowned lawyer, but as arrogant as Logan, always looking for ways to instigate debates or provocations. "You always talk about how you can handle anything. How about proving that with something more challenging?" Logan raised an eyebrow, a mocking smile dancing on his lips. "You know I always deliver on what I say, Ethan. What are you talking about now?" The others in the circle, including women in shimmering dresses and men in impeccable suits, leaned in, excited by the tone of provocation. "Well," Ethan continued, emptying his champagne glass and gesturing dramatically, "let's give you a real test. You always have the best of everything, Logan. I want to see if you can handle someone who has absolutely nothing. How about marrying a homeless woman?" The laughter that echoed from the group was deafening. The idea seemed too absurd even for that circle of bored rich people. Logan, however, did not laugh. He crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly, as he did when assessing a challenge. "Marry a homeless woman? What kind of bet is that, Ethan? It sounds more like a bad joke." "It's simple," Ethan insisted, now with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "You marry a homeless woman, bring her to live here, in your penthouse, and keep it up for 3 months. And no ridiculous clauses to make your life easier. Treat it like a real marriage. If you succeed, we'll donate $1 million to your favorite charity. If you fail, well, you lose, and I decide on an appropriate penance." The atmosphere grew tense for a moment. Logan observed the expressions around him. Some looked hesitant, but most had that curious look, eager to see what would come of it. Logan's pride, however, was his guide in situations like this. He could not resist an opportunity to prove that he was always up to, or above, any challenge. "Done," he declared, with a confident smile that seemed almost rehearsed. "But know that by the end of these 3 months, not only will I have one, but I will also transform this person into something you won't even recognize. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get." The applause and laughter returned, and the conversation quickly shifted direction, but Logan knew there was something deeper in that bet. He wasn't doing it for the money, nor for Ethan's approval or anyone else's there. For him, it was just another play, a chance to reinforce his image of invincibility. As the party continued, he walked out to the penthouse balcony, looking at the vibrant lights of New York below. He didn't yet know who the woman would be that he would choose for that cruel experiment, but for Logan, it didn't matter. It was just a game, and he always played to win. The next morning, the sky over Manhattan was overcast, a harbinger of snow, as Logan walked through the city streets accompanied by his friend, Ethan. The two, dressed in designer coats and impeccable scarves, stood out completely from the scene around them, where people hurried to escape the biting cold. Logan, however, seemed oblivious to the climatic discomfort, maintaining his confident smile and relaxed posture. "So, what's the plan, Logan?" Ethan asked, with a tone of ironic amusement. "Are you just going to pick the first person you see? Or are you looking for something specific?" Logan stopped at the corner of a busy street, observing the incessant flow of people. "It's not about who shows up first, Ethan. I need someone who makes this interesting. After all, I like challenges." He continued walking, looking from side to side, until his eyes caught something that made him stop. Sitting on the ground in front of a bustling cafe was a young woman, wrapped in an old, patched coat. In front of her, a simple cardboard sign read, in shaky letters, "Homeless, hungry. Please help." Her hair, a mess of brown strands, fell over her face, but Logan noticed her eyes, which shone with a mix of desperation and exhaustion. "Her," Logan said, with a determination that surprised even Ethan. "Her?" Ethan repeated, frowning. "Logan, are you serious? She looks difficult." "That's exactly what makes it all the more interesting," Logan replied, with a mischievous smile. Without waiting for Ethan's response, he stepped toward the woman. Hannah felt his presence before she even looked up. When she finally glanced up, she saw an impeccably dressed man, looking at her as if he were evaluating something in a display window. There was something unsettling about that gaze, but she didn't have the strength to react. The cold from the previous night still lingered in her body, and hunger made her mind spin. "Hi," Logan said, kneeling in front of her to be at eye level. He seemed genuinely interested, but there was something strange about his smile. "I'm Logan. What's your name?" Hannah hesitated. People rarely asked her name. "Hannah," she replied, her voice hoarse from not speaking to anyone for a long time. "Hannah," he repeated, as if savoring the sound. "Are you hungry?" She frowned. "If I weren't, I wouldn't be here," she replied bluntly. Logan let out a short laugh, impressed by her honesty. "Fair enough. So, here's the deal. I'll take you out to eat right now. A hot meal, whatever you want. And on top of that, I'll give you a place to stay. A bed, new clothes, and food every day. But there's one condition." Hannah narrowed her eyes, suspicious. Proposals like that never came without something in return. "What's the condition?" Logan leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice, but keeping the tone almost casual, as if discussing a trivial contract. "You need to marry me. It's a deal, so to speak. Don't worry, I'm not asking for anything personal. It's just a contract. 3 months. After that, you can leave and take some money with you if you want." Confusion washed over Hannah. She looked at him as if he were a lunatic. "Marry you? Why? What kind of joke is this?" Logan shrugged. "Let's say it's a social experiment. You don't need to understand it now. All you need to know is that if you accept, you'll have a warm place to sleep, new clothes, and food to spare. Or you can stay here, freezing and begging for change. The choice is yours." Hannah felt a knot in her stomach. It was surreal, almost unbelievable, but she didn't have many options. She had survived worse situations, and hunger was starting to win over any resistance. She looked at Logan again, trying to find some sincerity in his face. She saw nothing but arrogance and self-confidence, but the promise of food and warmth spoke louder. "Okay," she murmured, almost not believing what she was saying. "I accept." Logan stood up, extended his hand to help her up, and the victorious smile on his face was unmistakable. "Great. Let's start this adventure, Hannah. I promise you won't regret it." As the two walked together, Ethan followed them at a short distance, chuckling to himself. He knew this was just the beginning of a story that would undoubtedly be as chaotic as it was intriguing. The trip to the Hamptons unfolded in almost complete silence. Hannah, sitting in the immaculate leather seat of Logan's car, looked out the window, trying to understand what she had just done. The world around her seemed unreal, with the bustling streets of Manhattan fading behind as wide, tree-lined roads appeared ahead. Logan drove with a calm expression, as if her presence beside him was perfectly normal. He didn't initiate conversation, and Hannah saw no reason to start a dialogue. Upon arriving at the mansion, the impact overwhelmed her. The automatic gate opened slowly, revealing a gigantic property surrounded by immaculate gardens. The house, or rather, the palace, had modern architecture, with large glass windows and details that exuded wealth. Hannah nervously clasped her hands in her lap, feeling completely out of place. Logan parked the car in the circular driveway and got out with agile movements, leaving the door open for her. "Welcome to your new home," he declared, his tone laden with sarcasm and something that sounded like personal triumph. "At least for the next 3 months." Hannah got out of the car, hesitantly, her eyes scanning every detail around her. The air felt clean and fresh, but it carried a weight that suffocated her. Before she could say anything, the large front door of the mansion opened, revealing a team of staff. They wore immaculate uniforms and quickly formed a line, waiting for orders. "Mr. Harrison," began an older woman, who seemed to be the housekeeper. Her voice was polite, but the smile was clearly forced. She cast a brief, calculating glance at Hannah before returning her attention to Logan. "Everything is prepared for your arrival." Logan ignored the formality and stepped toward the entrance, casually waving to the staff. "Take care of the bags in the car." "Oh, and this is Hannah," he said, pointing to her with an indifference that made her feel even smaller than she already did. "She'll be staying here with me for a while. Treat her like the lady of the house." The mocking tone did not go unnoticed, either by the staff or by Hannah. Murmurs began as soon as Logan entered, leaving Hannah alone in the foyer. She felt the curious stares and the whispered words from the people around her, but she forced herself to lift her chin and maintain her composure. One of the younger staff members, visibly uncomfortable, approached her and led her to one of the rooms. The room was larger than anywhere Hannah had ever been. A huge bed with perfectly folded white sheets occupied the center of the space. The floor shone, and the velvet curtains looked like they had come out of a decor magazine. "The gentleman requested that we prepare new clothes for you," the staff member informed her before hurriedly leaving Hannah alone. She approached the mirror, where an elegant dress hung next to shiny shoes. For a moment, her hand hesitated as it touched the soft fabric. It was clear that Logan saw all of this as a game. He had thrown her into this luxurious setting as if he wanted to prove something to someone, perhaps to himself. But Hannah refused to be a mere pawn in that game. Straightening her shoulders, she decided she wouldn't give Logan the pleasure of seeing her break. When she descended to the living room hours later, wearing the new clothes, Logan was waiting for her, casually seated on a sofa with a glass of wine. He assessed her from head to toe, as if he were analyzing the results of an experiment. "Much better," he commented with a cold smile. "Now you look like someone who belongs in this place." Hannah didn't respond. She simply walked over to a nearby armchair and sat down, keeping her eyes firmly on his. Even though she felt uncomfortable, she decided she wouldn't give Logan the satisfaction of seeing her back down. The first days in the mansion continued at an uncomfortable pace, laden with unspoken tension. Logan maintained his indifferent demeanor, preoccupied with meetings and phone calls, while Hannah, although trying to adapt to the opulent environment, often avoided any unnecessary interaction. But Logan watched her, even if she didn't realize it. He was beginning to notice that Hannah was nothing like he had imagined when he made his bed. She moved through the house with a posture that defied her current situation. There was no submissive despair in her that Logan had expected to find, but rather a dignity that intrigued him. Her vocabulary was articulate, and her manners were refined, something that completely clashed with the image of a woman who lived on the streets. It was at dinner a few days after her arrival that Logan decided to probe her. The table was impeccably set, as usual, and Hannah, although still uncomfortable with all the formality, wore a simple dress that she carried with surprising elegance. Logan studied her as she ate, seemingly distracted, until he decided to break the silence. "So Hannah," he began, leaning slightly forward, "you have an interesting way about you. You don't seem like someone who has spent so much time on the streets. How did that happen?" Hannah looked at him, hesitating for a moment. She placed her fork on the plate before responding, her voice steady. "It wasn't always like this. My life was very different before." "Before what?" Logan asked, his eyes fixed on hers. "Before my mother died," Hannah replied, her tone carrying sadness but also a latent strength. "My childhood was good. My mother worked hard to give me everything she could. I attended good schools, had plans for the future. But everything changed when she left. My father couldn't cope with the loss, and things started to fall apart. He lost his job, the house was sold, and we moved from place to place until one day I was alone." Logan continued to look at her, intrigued. "And you never try to go back? Rebuild things, in some way?" Hannah raised her eyes to him, with an expression that mixed weariness and determination. "Do you think I didn't try? Life doesn't work that way, for everyone. Some doors close and never open again." There was a silence in the room, interrupted only by the distant sound of the wind outside. Logan rested his elbows on the table and watched her for a few more seconds before speaking again. "You speak like someone who has had access to a lot. Education, for example. You seem to have read a lot. Hannah smiled slightly, but without joy. I read everything I could when I was younger. Books were my escape. When everything started to crumble, I still tried to hold on to that, but it's hard to think about literature when you don't have anything to eat or a place to sleep. Her response echoed in Logan's mind, bringing an unease he couldn't explain. There was something in Hannah's story that stirred him, a connection he didn't fully understand. She didn't seem to fit the profile of someone who had simply fallen into misery. He felt there was more to her story, something she hadn't yet shared, or perhaps something she herself hadn't realized. In the days that followed, Logan began to pay even more attention to her. He watched her in moments when he thought no one was looking. He noticed the careful way she organized the books in the library, as if they were too precious to be treated carelessly. He saw how she wore the clothes he had given her, not with the awe of someone impressed by luxury, but with the naturalness of someone who was already accustomed to it. One night, alone in his office, Logan began to research stories of families that faced tragedies and fell apart. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but the figure of Hannah, with her mix of vulnerability and strength, remained present in his mind. Something in her story didn't add up, and for the first time in a long time, Logan felt a genuine curiosity that didn't stem from a bet or a challenge, but from a real interest. The night was silent in the mansion, except for the distant sound of the wind outside. Logan, in silk pajamas and holding a glass of whiskey, had climbed up to the attic for the first time in years. He was looking for an old box where he kept childhood memories, a request from his governess to decide what to do with those things before the space was reorganized. The attic, although immaculate like the rest of the house, had a smell of old wood and dust that discreetly accumulated in the corners. Logan rummaged distractedly, glancing over boxes labeled with dates and vague descriptions. Summer of '98, Christmas with the family in Aspen, elementary school. He opened one of the boxes, revealing a stack of photo albums, old notebooks, and trophies from school competitions. He sat down in a wooden chair, crossing his legs as he opened a leather-bound album. The pages contained carefully organized photographs, capturing moments from his childhood in a world of privilege. Lavish birthday parties, international trips, and school events. Logan smiled faintly at seeing images of himself, younger, in immaculate uniforms, surrounded by classmates he could barely remember. When he turned another page, something made him freeze. A photograph, taken during a group school activity, caught his attention. It was an image of 5 children standing in front of a blackboard, holding posters for a science project. He was in the left corner of the photo, with the same confident smile he still carried today. But it wasn't him that held his attention. It was the girl next to him, with brown hair tied in a ponytail and a shy smile. Hannah. Logan blinked, as if expecting the image to disappear. He lifted the album closer to his face, studying every detail. There was no doubt it was Hannah, younger, better cared for, in a perfectly fitted school uniform. He vaguely remembered the project, but not her presence. Logan quickly flipped through the next pages and found another photo, taken during a field trip to the Natural History Museum. There she was again, sitting next to him on a school bus, looking out the window with the same introspective expression he now recognized. He abruptly closed the album and stood up, trying to process what he had just discovered. Hannah was not just a stranger he had pulled off the streets in a ridiculous bet. She was part of his past, from a world he never expected to cross paths with again. With his mind racing, Logan descended from the attic, carrying the album under his arm. He headed to his office, dropped the book on the table, and ran his fingers through his hair. He began to vaguely remember Hannah in school, a quiet, intelligent student who didn't do much to draw attention. She never participated in the jokes and pranks of the popular group, of which he was practically the leader, but she always seemed to be around, watching. The connection seemed obvious now. Hannah had mentioned her mother's death, the collapse of the comfortable life she once knew. Logan began to piece things together. Her fall into poverty, dropping out of school, and the years that had likely been spent erasing any trace of the life she once had. He sat in his chair, running a hand over his face. "How did I not realize this before?" he murmured to himself. Hannah, downstairs, was in the reading room, absorbed in one of the books from the library, unaware of what Logan had just discovered. He felt a wave of guilt, something rare in his life. His bet, which had started as a game, now seemed cruel on a level he hadn't considered. He had pulled Hannah from a desperate situation, but with frivolous intentions. And now, understanding that she was someone from his past added a layer of complexity he didn't know how to face. For a moment, Logan thought about confronting her immediately, but decided against it. He needed to think to understand what this discovery meant and how he would deal with it. But one thing was certain: Hannah was not just a pawn in his bet. She was a living reminder of how cruel and unpredictable the world could be, even for those who started life with every chance in their favor. As he looked at the album again, Logan felt something stir within him, a need to repair the damage, to do something more meaningful than simply winning the bet. He didn't know how, but he was sure that this revelation would change everything. The mansion was immersed in the silence of the night when Logan decided he could no longer postpone the conversation. Ever since he had found Hannah's photo in the school albums, he couldn't think of anything else. The image of her as a young girl, with an innocent and hopeful face, contrasted brutally with the woman who now inhabited his home. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her again, but the realization of what she had lost over the years. Logan felt a pressure in his chest, a mix of shame, guilt, and something deeper that he still couldn't name. Hannah was in the reading room, as she usually was at night. The space, spacious and cozy, was a refuge she had instinctively chosen. She sat in an armchair near the window, immersed in a book she could barely finish, as her mind often wandered. When Logan entered, she looked up, surprised to see him there at that hour. He rarely sought company outside of his own moments of distraction. "We need to talk," he said, straightforward, his voice low, but laden with an unusual gravity. Hannah slowly closed the book, realizing something was different. "About what?" she asked cautiously. Logan walked over to the side table and placed the photo album on it, opening it to the exact page where the image of both of them was. He pushed the album toward her, watching her reaction. Hannah leaned forward, her eyes fixating on the photograph. When she recognized the image, her breath became heavier. She touched the page with her fingers, almost as if she needed to confirm it was real. "You were my classmate," Logan said, his voice softer now. "In school. I remember you, but I had no idea who you were when I made that bet." He hesitated before continuing. "Why didn't you ever mention it?" Hannah laughed, but the sound was bitter. "What was I supposed to say, Logan? Hey, remember me? We studied together before my life turned into a disaster. Do you think I wanted you to know?" She shook her head, looking away. "I tried to forget that time. It was easier than clinging to something I could never get back." Logan felt the weight of her words like a blow. He moved closer, sitting in the armchair opposite hers. "I had no idea," he confessed, his voice heavy with regret. "About what happened to you, about everything you went through. When I found you, I thought it was just a stupid bet, a game to pass the time. But now," he paused, trying to find the right words, "now I see it was cruel, and you didn't deserve that." Hannah stared at him, her eyes misty. "Didn't deserve it? You dragged me into this as if I were an object. As if my life wasn't already hard enough. But what else did you expect, Logan? My whole life has been made of impossible choices. You offered me a temporary escape, and I accepted. It was just another way to survive." The tears finally fell, but Hannah quickly wiped them away, refusing to appear weak. Logan felt something break inside him at the sight of her like that. It wasn't just pity. It was a deep admiration for the strength she showed, even in the face of everything she had endured. "I don't want you to think this is just another part of the game," Logan said, leaning in closer. "I don't want you to keep thinking you have no value, because you do. You are incredible, Hannah. The way you faced all of this and still managed to keep your dignity. I've never known anyone like that." Hannah blinked, surprised by his words. For a moment, the silence between them grew heavy, but not uncomfortable. She looked at him, trying to understand if there was sincerity in his face. "Why are you saying this now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "After everything you've done?" Logan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck in a nervous gesture that wasn't typical of him. "Because now I see you. For real. Not as part of a bet, but as the person you are. And I don't want this to end the way it started." He hesitated before adding, with an honesty that surprised even himself, "I care about you, Hannah. More than I thought was possible." Hannah's expression softened, but she still seemed reluctant to trust. "And how can I believe that, Logan? How do I know this isn't just another game for you?" Logan stood up, running his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated with himself. "I don't know how to prove it to you right now. but I will figure it out. I just want you to know that. I want to do things differently. Not because of the bet. Because of you. Hannah remained silent for a long moment, looking at him as if trying to decipher him. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. If you're being sincere, Logan, you'll need to prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Because I can't afford to believe in something that could hurt me even more. Logan nodded, a look of determination on his face. I will prove it. It may take time, but I will prove it. The living room of the mansion in the Hamptons was filled with Logan's friends, the same group that had proposed the cruel bet months earlier. They laughed and toasted, celebrating yet another night of excess and frivolity, unaware that the host was planning something very different this time. Logan, standing near the fireplace, looked at the group with a serious expression, holding a nearly untouched glass of wine. Beside him, Hannah remained silent, visibly uncomfortable, but maintaining a firm posture. Ethan, the friend who had initiated the bet, stood up with his usual mischievous smile. So, Logan, we're all curious. Did you manage to fulfill your part of the deal? 3 months, right? I bet it was challenging. Laughter echoed through the room, but Logan did not smile. He walked to the center of the space, drawing everyone's attention. It's true, he began, his voice steady. The bet was fulfilled. 3 months. But I want to make something clear. The bet ends here now. The group fell silent, intrigued by his unexpectedly serious tone. Ethan raised an eyebrow, confused. What does that mean, Logan? Are you giving up on us? Logan looked him directly in the eye, the weight of guilt mixed with the strength of determination. It means that all of this, the bet, the idea of using a person as part of a game, was one of the cruelest and most shameful things I've ever done in my life. And I will no longer feed this game. Hannah is not part of a game. She is my wife, and I respect her like I've never respected anyone. There was a murmur of surprise among the friends. Some laughed, thinking Logan was putting on a show, but the serious expression on his face quickly silenced the laughter. Wait a minute, Ethan said, trying to regain control of the situation. Are you saying this is serious now? That she is really your wife? Yes, Logan replied without hesitation. He looked at Hannah, who was staring at him with wide eyes, surprised by the declaration. And I will no longer allow anyone to treat her as anything less than she is. Hannah is one of the strongest and most resilient people I've ever known. She has been through things that none of us could even imagine surviving, and I am proud to stand by her. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by a muffled giggle from one of the women in the group. Logan, this sounds a bit melodramatic, don't you think? We're talking about a bet, nothing more. Logan turned to her, his gaze cold and cutting. No, we're talking about a person with a life, a story, and a strength that none of us have. You can laugh as much as you want, but know that from today on, if anyone has anything to say about Hannah, they will have to say it in front of me. Hannah stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Logan's words were as unexpected as they were powerful. He had just completely exposed himself in front of people who only knew his selfish and confident facade. For the first time, she saw someone willing to defend her, not out of obligation, but because he believed in her. This is crazy, Ethan murmured, but his voice sounded less confident. You've changed, Logan. Yes, I've changed, Logan replied with conviction. And it's the best thing that has ever happened to me. Without saying anything more, he approached Hannah and extended his hand to her. For a moment, she hesitated, but seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she accepted the gesture. He led her out of the room, leaving behind the confused murmurs and stunned expressions of their friends. In the hallway, Hannah finally spoke, her voice still trembling. Why did you do that, Logan? He stopped, turning to face her. Because you deserve to be treated with respect, Hannah. And because I realized that I care about you in a way I never imagined. I don't want to hide that anymore, nor pretend that you are less than you are. I want the world to know how much you mean to me. Hannah looked at him for a long moment, trying to process the words that surprised and moved her so deeply. For the first time, she felt that someone truly saw her, not as a symbol or a problem to be solved, but as a person. Without saying anything more, she squeezed his hand more firmly, walking alongside Logan as a partner, not as a bet. The transformation in the relationship between Logan and Hannah was gradual but inevitable. As the months went by, she blossomed in her new life, reclaiming parts of herself that she believed were lost forever. The business course became an unexpected passion, and Hannah soon stood out among her peers for her dedication and intelligence. Each small success made her hold her head a little higher, the spark of determination in her eyes growing every day. Logan, on the other hand, was also changing. The arrogance that once defined his personality was being replaced by a genuine sense of humility. He watched Hannah's progress from a distance, offering support whenever needed, but without invading her space. Logan understood that part of her growth depended on her independence, and he respected that deeply. The nights in the mansion, which were once marked by uncomfortable silence, now had a different air. Hannah and Logan often found themselves in the reading room, discussing books or everyday topics. Laughter began to flow naturally between the two, and the exchanged glances carried a new intimacy. One night, after Hannah presented an important project in her course, Logan surprised her with a dinner on the mansion's balcony. The table, decorated with simplicity but good taste, was lit by candles, and the sound of the ocean filled the air. Hannah, upon seeing the scene, raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "What's the occasion?" she asked, trying to hide her smile. Logan shrugged, a playful glint in his eyes. "I thought you deserved a celebration. I heard your project was the most praised in the class." She sat down, still cautious, but clearly touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do this, Logan." "I know," he said, pouring her a glass of wine. "But I wanted to. You earned this, Hannah, and I'm proud of you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, she watched him in silence, trying to process the change she saw in him. Logan was no longer the selfish and superficial man who had proposed the bet. He had become someone capable of kind gestures, someone she was beginning to admire. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed easily. Logan, in a moment of relaxation, shared stories from his childhood, and Hannah, laughing, recounted the embarrassing moments from her early days at school. The past that connected them seemed less heavy now, as if they had both found a way to reconcile who they were with who they were becoming. After dinner, as they walked through the gardens under the starry sky, Logan suddenly stopped, looking at her with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice low. Hannah stared at him, her heart racing. "What is it?" Logan hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I fell in love with you, Hannah. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know I can't ignore it. You changed me in ways I never thought possible. You made me want to be better, and I am better because you are in my life." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Hannah was silent, trying to process the declaration. Finally, she smiled, a genuine and warm smile. "I see you differently now too, Logan," she said softly. "At first, you were just a guy who put me in an absurd situation. But now I see someone who has learned to look at the world beyond himself. And that is something I admire. Something that—" She hesitated, but then found the courage. "Something that makes me feel the same way about you." Logan laughed, relieved, and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "So, maybe we can start something real? No bets, no games. Just the two of us." Hannah nodded, squeezing his hand. "I think we can try." Months later, the two traveled together to visit the school where they met. Logan had planned the visit as a surprise, and when Hannah saw the familiar building, her eyes sparkled with emotion. They walked through the hallways, now remodeled but still carrying the spirit of nostalgia they both shared. They stopped in front of a mural of old photographs, where Logan pointed to the image he had discovered in the attic months before. "Look," he said, smiling. "You were always special, Hannah." She laughed, playfully nudging him. "And you were always the cocky boy that no one dared to confront." "Maybe," Logan replied, with a sincere smile. "But thanks to you, I discovered I can be more than that." Hannah linked her arm with his, and together, they walked through the schoolyard, now as equal and united partners, ready to face the future they were building side by side.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to continue watching.